Day Wednesday, Chapter 6, their second day. Now what in the world happened to you, Mel? Dad put down a local island newspaper, noticing his daughter arriving for breakfast. He'd been unaware anything was amiss last night when the kids had gone to bed. Mel self-consciously raised a hand to her mangled hair. "Morning, Daddy," she said, kissing him on the cheek on the way to her chair at the table. "That's a serious case of bedhead," teased her brother, forking into some haggis. "You look amazing." The others had already gathered for their second breakfast meal at the Harrowing house. Today, Kruger was making full Scottish breakfasts for everyone. Fried eggs, bacon, sausage, fried mushrooms and tomato, baked beans, fried bread, toast, black pudding, and haggis. Tarzan eyed his black pudding with suspicion. "Would you like some breakfast, dearie?" spitted their plaid-aproned host, looking up from the stove. "How would you like your eggs? Scrambled or poached?" Thankfully, he was facing away from the frying pan when he spoke. "May I have mine over easy, please?" she asked. "And that's all I'll have, thank you." Melody looked around the table at all the massive plates covered in greasy fried food. "This is probably too much food for me." Turning back to the stove, Kruger relented. "Suit yourself, precious." Sudden bursts of steam erupted as spit landed sizzling in the hot pan. "Looks like you lot have been keeping out of trouble," Dad continued, looking at them one by one with parental amusement. You kids been behaving?" "Yes," responded Tarzan, unconvincingly, recalling his complicit involvement in the office last night. He still hadn't touched his plate. The unfamiliar haggis and so-called pudding were deterring his appetite. The loud, wet spurts coming from the pan, however, helped make up his mind. Tar pushed his plate an inch away, reaching instead for a dried piece of toast stacked at the center of the table. "I hope you don't get yourselves into too much hooliganism here, Pop Fizzle," called Kruger, spatula in hand, seriously engaged in his work. "There's plenty to explore," splash, hiss, "but you'll nae want to get hurt." Tarzan, listening to the chaos warring atop the stove, made silent eyes with Mel, as if to say, "Are you seriously going to eat that?" Mel stared back, not comprehending. "Oh, what the heck." Tossing discretion aside, he mimicked aloud, "Are you seriously going to eat that?" "Please don't be rude, Tarzan," Dad spoke over the Porkney Weekly. "Have you got the problem with my cooking, laddie?" Spray, hiss, gurgle. Scraping the cooked contents of the pan onto a fresh plate, their chef brought the eggs over, proudly placing them in front of Melody. Mel smiled her polite appreciation. Then, as soon as Kruger turned his back, followed Tar's lead, also reaching for a slice of toast instead. Huey lifted his snout from his newly polished trough. Quickly taking advantage of the situation, he reached over for Tar and Mel's full plates. "I'll have that, thank you," he said opportunistically. Straight in he tucked, oblivious to their stunned expressions. Huey, buried up to his pink ears in oily mushrooms and fried beans, noshed away, content as a hog in a sty. "You're a really good cook, sir," he belched, curly tail wriggling with delight. Tar and Mel, eyes wide, mouths frozen agape, looked at each other, over at Hugo, then at each other again. Dad, grimacing at his son's boorish appetite, made to move from the table. Then, to their host, "The weather promises to be nice all week?" The chef nodded and concurred, tossing dirty utensils into the sink with a noisy clatter. "Och, aye, although we're no strangers to the odd summer storm, mind." "Well, we've picked a good week to come, then," declared Dad. On his way out of the kitchen, Have fun gallivanting outside, you hooligans. I'm sure you'll manage to amuse yourselves. Make sure you take some lunch and be sure to be back in time for dinner. Making his way down the hall to his room, he smiled to himself. He could still hear his son's oinks and squeals resounding from within the kitchen. Since the three of them had spent most of their first day walking to town and hanging out at the beach, they hadn't actually had time to explore the property. Having snatched a bit of fruit from the kitchen to tide them over until lunch, they decided to familiarize themselves with the surrounding grounds outside the Harrowing house. Standing at the top of the steps of the front door facing south, they looked out upon the gravel courtyard lying before them. Across from them was Tony the Pony's stable alongside a cluster of other sheds and outbuildings. A small wooded area stood off to their left, on either side of the driveway they'd come up and down a few times already. "I'm going to say good morning to Tony," said Melody, making her way down the wide concrete steps. Huey and Tarzan followed after her as she headed across the courtyard, 3 pairs of shoes crunching in the gravel. Tony was safe in his stall, munching quietly on some dry straw which Kruger must have gotten up early to feed him with. "Morning, Tony," Melody called from the open barn door. The Shetland pony slowly looked up at her, peacefully swishing his tail. Tar and Hugo poked their heads in behind Mel and said a quick, "Hey!" before heading straight back out to inspect the other sheds nearby. Cheeky. Mel did the courteous thing and went in to give Tony a gentle pat on the rump, admiring the worn leather saddle, bit and bridle, and various old farm tools hanging off the walls. There was a comforting aroma of musty wooden stalls, freshly forked hay, lingering pony dung, and dirt. The smell of good old-fashioned hard work. Heading back outside, she found the boys not too far away, stopped and staring up at the house. It was indeed a grand home. The Harrowing house looked bigger in the daytime than when they'd arrived on their very first night. They were likely having far too much fun and in too much hurry to notice yesterday, but this morning they observed every detail. Beautiful flower beds skirted the building beneath wide bay windows, exquisite curtains pulled to either side. Both lengthy and single balconies set majestically overlooking the grounds. Masonry stone built up lofty towers and turrets, chimneys and spires. Moss and creeping green vines covered whole sections of the exterior, masking small round windows spying from on high. The boys tried to figure out where their bedrooms were and which windows might be theirs. It was difficult to be certain. Tarzan thought about his late-night wanderings upstairs, and with X-ray vision attempted to map out his route. No luck. Hugo, moving backwards to get a better view, accidentally stepped into an old galvanized steel bucket. Stumbling to catch his balance, he kicked it out of the way. This gave him an idea. "Hey, who wants to play kick the can?" he called, grinning at the others. "I'm in," said Tar, eyeing some cool spots to hide behind sheds and random stable equipment. Before Melody could respond, Huey shouted, "Mel's it!" Kicking the bucket as hard as he could, he and Tar ran to go hide. Melody, shaking her head, ran to retrieve the bucket clanking down the courtyard. Sigh, little brothers. The idea is for whoever hides to make it back to home base without getting caught by whoever's it. The person who has the unfortunate luck of being it obviously has to spot the hiders, call their names out loud, and run back and touch home base before they do. If, however, someone makes it back to home base before the person who's it does, they have the glorious option of kicking the bucket as hard as they can and shouting, "Kick the can!" thus giving fellow hiders more time to move into better hiding spots, or to try and get all the way home free. The it person, of course, has to go chasing after the can and bring it back to base before being able to chase any more hiders. But whenever someone gets caught, they have to switch places immediately with whoever is it. Great game. Melody caught up to the rolling bucket in no time, took it back to the shed door where they had been standing, set it in position upside down, and then proceeded to look for the boys. Hugo and Tar hiding together behind Tony's cart, watched Mel disappear around a corner of a shed. With a quick burst, Tarzan shot back to the doorway designated as home free, shouted, "Kick the can!" and gave the bucket an almighty boot, sending it rolling away. Hugo took that moment to shift to a closer position, while Melody reappeared, having to chase after the can. Sadly, his sister spotted him shuffling about awkwardly, mistakenly thinking he was unseen. "Who is it?" called Mel, happily running back to the shed door and giving it a tap. Before her younger brother had a chance to come out of hiding, she gave the bucket a neat little boot. "Kick the can!" she yelled, running off to find her own hiding spot. Huey huffed after the pail while Tarzan zipped safely home. "Home free!" he shouted to the world, but instead of staying put, he ran back to hide again. Not sure that's the idea of the game. Nevertheless, poor Hugo was destined to be it for quite a while. Tar and Mel beat him back to the bucket time and time again, sending it flying down the driveway over and over. The echoing clunks and clanks disturbing birds resting in the trees. With all that running back and forth, Hugo's ginormous greasy breakfast started coming back to taunt him. "Oh, I don't feel too good," he screamed, clutching his belly. "I think I ate way too much, way too fast." Mr. Oinkster, having astutely diagnosed his condition, leaned against the wall, panting for breath. Sensing a purge coming on, he spied the bucket at hand and knelt down to quickly flip it right side up. "Blah!" came up remnants of haggis. "Blarg!" heaved out semblances of blood pudding. "Blah!" spewed up a blend of greasy mushrooms and eggs, rapidly filling the upturned bucket. Hugo sat back on his heels to recover for a moment, wiping his mouth with his sleeve. Just then, Tarzan, oblivious to the situation, came running up from behind at breakneck speed. "Kick the..." Emulating the agility of a professional sports athlete, he laid into that bucket with all the exquisite athleticism he could muster. "Can!" With the fans screaming wildly from the stands, Tarzan's studded football boot hit the sweet spot, connecting with the bucket superbly. Boom! Barely chewed, undigested vomit exploded all over Hugo and Tarzan. Up flew the bucket. The crowd stood to their feet, roaring their hysteria, spilling drinks and waving jerseys overhead shirtless torsos. Out splashed wet haggis. All over sloshed runny eggs and beans. Everywhere splooched tomato and mushy toast. Hearing sudden cries of, "What the?" Melody came round the corner to see the two boys, covered from head to toe, dripping with a convoluted blend of full Scottish breakfasts. Yuck! A bite of pork sausage slid from Huey's face. What a mess. Huey caught the spicy morsel in his hand, sniffed at it, then put it straight back into his mouth. "Ugh, Hugo," Tarzan recoiled. "That's gross." "Are you okay, Huey?" asked his sister with concern. He looked up at her meekly. "Can we be done now?" he pleaded. "Yes, I think the game is over." Tarzan ran after the soiled bucket and placed it back beside the shed door as if nothing had happened. "That should be fine right there," he said, the problem obviously now out of their hands. Hearing the front door open, they took off through a tall gate to the left side of the house before anyone spotted them. Kruger came out of the house, heading straight for the sheds. It was time to feed Tony some mixed grain. Reaching down for the pail, he stopped and sniffed the air. Odd. Picking up the bucket, he couldn't help but notice it appeared more dented than usual. Huh. Ducking inside, he went to a large grain sack and scooped some grain out, filling the bucket 3/4 full. Hooking the pail inside Tony's stall, he left, leaving the pony to his treats. Shutting the door, Kruger stopped and looked at his hand, wondering why it was so wet. Was that a piece of bacon on his thumb? Must have been from cooking earlier. He was sure he'd washed his hands after breakfast. Heading back to the house, Kruger absent-mindedly sucked on his fingers.